What's the objective? Create a logical, efficient, and math-compatible system for understanding the 7 modes, going from the Ionian to the Locrian by assigning them a fixed absolute numbering system rather than rotating them based on a parent scale. Now, you could make some arguments on how we should number them. I'm going to go from numbers 1 through 7. We'll talk more about that shortly. But first, you might be asking and saying, hey, look, that's a lot of stuff right now. I don't even know what you're saying. I'm not even sure what the modes exactly are. And you're going into basically changing things about the modes before we've even learned about it. You're putting the cart before the horse. And just bear with me here, because we will take a step back and think about the modes in more detail. But before we do, I want to identify one of the major problems and hurdles which I think really impacts the progression of, in particular, guitar players, but also piano players as well, because of the way the naming convention is worked, forcing us to move our perspective from what I think would be the most logical system to one that we have to kind of change to conform to the way the language is being put together. And so we're going to be looking this time at the modes, which you might say, hey, look, that's an advanced topic. I want to learn the major scale, the minor scale, how to put basic, normal, and simple chords together. I'll look at modes when I get into like an advanced course or something like that. But that's the problem, you see? That's exactly what I'm talking about, because from the guitar standpoint, the modal viewpoint is actually easier. Now, I know you're just some blues, jazz, wonky guy over there that thinks that you're trying to do something different. It's like, no, I'm seriously, this is easier to do. That's going to be that's the thing I want to point out. To learn in a modal system is going to be actually easier than not learning in a modal system, even if you want to be playing just normal music that's mainly in the major scale and the minor scale. So I want to identify the problem and then take a step back, learn the system in a way which I think would be most natural, opening up the fretboard as well as the keyboard as naturally as possible, and then gradually move that into the numbering, the naming conventions, which are the thing that drive us away from that natural form of learning because of the way the scale degrees are formatted and numbered and the way the chords are formatted and numbered. All right, so that's going to be our objective. Now, if we just look at this is our fretboard. I'm imagining we have the low or heavy string on top. We talked about before, what would be the best way to memorize the fretboard? I want to open up the fretboard. That's what I want to do as a player. That's what most guitarists want to do these days. I want to learn the open position chords, great, but I also want to be able to maneuver up and down the neck. So what do people normally do? Well, you could, 3 ways to learn the fretboard, learn all of the notes on the fretboard, or maybe just all of the notes in a particular scale, like C major and the related modes in a diatonic position. That's what we have laid out here. Everything that's in it is in the key of C and related modes. Everything that is blank is outside of it. So you could just learn that shape and be able to play not only C major, but A minor, D Dorian, all of the modes related to that scale. That's one option. Another option is that you can learn the relative positions to say the key of C major. And the positions, there's 7 notes, so you could say 1 through 7. That, however, you could see is clearly a problem, because if I don't want to play in C major, I want to play all these same notes, but I want to be playing in the minor key, then I have to switch the numbering system. So if I wanted to play in A, then normally it would, from the perspective of C, now this would be the 6th scale degree, right? But from scales, I would then have to make it the 1. So you see what that's a problem, because now even when I'm in the same key, I have to learn different numbering systems. That's the problem that we're having an issue with. Now, what would be the best way to learn this? What is the way that lines up with all the modern kind of things that you're probably hearing about, including the caged system, right? What is the cage system based on? It's based on open positions over here that are then being utilized to move those shapes up, learning the entire fretboard based on the shapes because everything is maneuverable on the fretboard. Similar, there's still maneuverability on a piano, by the way, but we see that on the fretboard. You can break the neck of the guitar into 5 positions that happen to line up to the caged shapes, the bar chords, and you can learn each shape in position. And then you can label those 5 positions in one way or another. So that is a very natural, more natural way to learn learn the guitar. But we get pulled out of that natural way of learning it because although learning all of these notes and learning them by shape allows us to move up and down the fretboard, when I start to build chords, it forces me into a scale degree system. So if I want to build a chord off of this D, I then am forced to say, well, that's the 1 because I have to build a 1, 3, 5 when I think about scale degrees or chord constructions. Or from a caged system, you'd say, no, I'm just going to build a bar chord based off of that. So you can see what's happening on the cage system. It's more intuitive. It's just looking at shapes. But it becomes a problem when you communicate those shapes because the language we have to communicate the shapes is based not on a fixed shape. It's based on the scale degrees. That's where the disconnect is happening. What I'd like to say is, no, I'm not going to rename this to 1. I'm just going to build off of what I'm going to call the Dorian chord, which is a minor chord, but I'm going to build off the Dorian. I want to keep the node the same as the second. I want to call it the second node. It doesn't change. I'm not going to change it to the first. I'm just going to keep calling it the second node. What does that do? It allows me to keep the same shape, having the same naming convention, and allows me to move the shape up from the key of C and its diatonic related scales to the key of C sharp, to D, to whatever. It moves up. That's the way you want to learn it. Now you're going to run into problems, again, with scale degrees when we get to our intervals, and we're going to run into problems when we get to our chord namings. So what we want to do is realize why this is beneficial and then build up so that when we get to the naming conventions, we can understand what we want to do and how the naming conventions are forcing us to do something different. And then how can we bridge the gap? How can we deal with that? So for example, like if I was looking at the distance between these two, we might call that a distance of an interval, right? But the interval is going to force me to make this the 1. And I don't want to make it the 1. I want to see it as the node of the Dorian node. If I compare these two, I could call it like a nodal range. I could say, well, I'm just going from Dorian to this one is Mixolydian, which I'm labeling with an X. Or I could call it a modal range of dx, or a modal range of going from absolute mode number 2 to 5. It's a modal range of a 2, 5. If I can see that range has a 5-note distance between these strings from a scale degree, I'm going to want to call it a perfect fifth, right? But I would rather call it like a range or by the distance from that node, because that doesn't force me to call this the 1. Why is that useful? Because if I go over here, there's the same distance between these two, but it's different from the standpoint of my total shape. I don't want to say that the distance between these two, if I think of that as the 1, is a 5-note away perfect fourth. I think I call that a perfect fifth. It's a 5-note away perfect fourth, right? If I went to these two, I don't want to say that's a 5-note away perfect fourth. I'd like to say something more specific. It has a modal range going from the PA modal range or something, right? It's going from the Phrygian to the Aeolian, or a modal range of a 3/6 modal range. Again, why is that more specific? Because this fits into my overarching shape. Otherwise, I'm going to think of this as the 1, and I feel like I'm shifting my entire shape up, as though I'm adjusting the entire shape. It's not adjusting the entire shape. This point is not changing within the overarching shape. I want to keep the point name the same, and then I want to look at the relationships between the different points within that overarching shape. You see, all of that is maneuverable, and all of that limits the renaming and the renumbering, the rememorization. Now, I know that sounds a little wonky right here. I'm going to show you it step by step and why I think that's a logical thing to do. And we will learn the normal interval naming conventions, but I want to learn them in conjunction with this idea of the modal conventions and tried to bridge the gap of being able to communicate as well as see visually. All right. Okay.